All right, good morning. Good morning. This is not a test. This is a book launch. Sorry for that noise. Again, good morning and welcome. It's my pleasure to meet you all this morning. We'll tone it down just a little bit. Thank you. My name is Sean Verhoeven. I am the Senior Vice President of Facilitation at Horn, and I've been honored and privileged to work at Horn for over 20 years. I want to start off with some quick introductions to our Horn team, and I'd like to ask some of my colleagues to raise their hands accordingly. So with us, some of our team, we have some of our project management team, which may be by the door and scattered throughout the room. Oh, there's some. There you are. Hello, hello. We also have some designer and developers from Horn. Raise your hand. There you are. And of course, we have our infamous client partnering group. And many of you know our client partnership team. Raise your hand like you need to. There you are. If you don't know these individuals, I'm sure you will by the end of this breakfast. So I have to start off first by really saying thank you, sharing some gratitude. Nowadays, it's far too easy to stay in the comfort of our office, whether it be our home office or in our corporate arena. And it's so easy to attend a webinar or to read an insightful article in LinkedIn. Perhaps it's a podcast. So it's way too easy. Well, guess what? This is a real book, and you're real people. And I commend you for making the effort to being here this morning. So thank you. We're excited to have you. I want to share a few things this morning. And one of them is, when we have launched books in the past, typically we have one large event. Well, we thought we would do a little bit of an experiment this year, and we had two different events. One, an executive breakfast. The second one is next week, and is a more traditional cocktail event. And by looking at the RSVPs, I will say under my breath, it looks like alcohol is winning out over ham and eggs. Just saying. Sorry. Mind you, we are surrounded nicely, so who knows what the laws are. I would like to share with you, it's always exciting and a tad scary when Art says to his team, I think I'm going to, when he reveals he's going to write a new book. And the reason why it's exciting, obviously, is that there's new thought. There's new ideas that Art has up in his head. It's kind of scary sometimes, depending on the topic. So when he described in the past writing books such as Gifts of Leadership, or books such as Beyond Ego, Influential Leadership Starts from Within, those are nice leadership contexts. But this year, when he told us, I'm going to sit down and put pen to paper or fingers on keyboard to actually talk to the universe about topics such as accountability, responsibility, commitment. His team, under our breath, all sort of said, oh geez. In fact, I wonder, what chapter will I show up in? Each of us thought. Hopefully, Art, it's when you refer to the he in a couple of these chapters, I trust it's not me that you refer to, such as the chapter called Bad Faith, or the chapter called Feeling Like a Victim, or perhaps Self-Absorption. My goodness, how about The Promise Breakers? And wait till you hear this one, Silos, Departmental Accusation, and Unending Wars. My goodness, Art. In fact, listen to this, I quote, near the introduction in Art's book, it says, I cannot deny I sometimes think it would be nice if the people who are accountable to me would always answer my queries and complaints by simply taking full responsibility. You see what I'm talking about? So, I want to share with you, actually, it's a really important topic. And we hear from all of our clients, Horn, help us drive ownership and accountability with our entire organization. Help us drive accountability with my department. Help me build strength in my team. And through our executive coaching realm, people actually say, Art, can you help me actually be more responsible for myself? And I'm really excited to share with you this book. That's it. This has all the answers for you. It's a beautiful blend of Art's intellect as well with some practical tips, checklists, and assessments. So we're really excited and proud of Art's work on this one. I'd like to conclude my quick intro by sharing a quick quote from the book. It says here, the harder you squeeze accountability, the less genuinely responsible they become. Tickle responsibility out of them by encouraging self-discovery and coming clean with themselves. That's the Art that I've come to know. He's my boss, he's a mentor, and he's a great friend. And I trust by the end of this breakfast, you too will get a few more insights from Art Horn. So what I'd like to ask now is that continue eating. I'll be back up with a few more introductions in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. And again, thank you for your presence. Cheers. Our first speaker, who has the pleasure of introducing Art Horn. He is a former and current client of Horn. He is a leader in the financial services community, as many of you are here this morning. He is now in the role of Vice President of Institutional Sales and Service at Mackenzie Investments, one of Canada's largest investment management firms. My pleasure to welcome Mr. Mark Sack.
Morning, everybody. And thanks a lot, Sean, and I hope this microphone works okay. I am a current Horn client and have been a Horn client for a bunch of years. Worked on a project with Sean back in the hedge fund days, and then that project led to some intensive work with our management group where I met Art. And so Sean kind of laid the foundation for a lot of the competitive edge stuff that our sales force was working on. And then Art came in and looked at our management team dynamics to make us more competitive. When you're selling hedge funds, you certainly need to be competitive. You know, it's funny that we're here this morning talking about a book that is entitled Throw Your Stuff Off a Plane. I was in Winnipeg 2 nights ago, and the plane pulls away from the gate and goes to de-ice, because of course it's freezing rain. And the pilot comes on the PA and announces that there's a sick passenger on board. And I'm in my mid-50s already, and so I feel for someone who's a sick passenger on an airplane. I think that's a scary thing. It turned out to be a 20-year-old something hipster with a knit hat, and he had drank too much in the Winnipeg terminal before getting on the plane and threw up all over a family in aisle 27. And I was sitting up front with all the flight attendants, and you can't just take somebody off a plane. An ambulance has to come, they take the person, and then a so-called grooming crew comes on in hazmat suits to clean up the plane. So we got home very late, but I thought to myself, this guy was thrown off the plane. And so, you know, not just his stuff, I mean everything, everything was thrown off. So it's my pleasure to be up here introducing Art Horn, the founder and president of Horn Consulting, located in a prestigious location at Dufferin and Steeles, where the head office is. And as you know, Art started the firm back in 1984. I recently completed reading Art's 5th book, Throw Your Stuff Off the Plane, and I was on a quest for truth and wisdom. I really wanted to be a better contributor in my organization and to my clients in the area of responsibility, commitment, and you know, just generally be more functional with my team members. And the book quickly drew me into thinking about myself and my own contribution, and in particular the chapter on overcoming the 12 obstacles to thinking and being and acting the way you really want to do that within your organization and with your clients. Accountability and responsibility are elusive and conceptual concepts in large organizations that you rarely feel to be kind of real to you. So I work in a large organization. I've worked for 3 of the largest US-based asset managers in the world. And some days you feel like you're raising billions of dollars and helping clients solve problems, and you feel like you own the place. You know, you walk around with a certain swagger, you feel like everything's great, you feel like everybody's fully engaged. And other days, I feel like a cog in a machine, a robotic machine that's going to just keep churning forever just because of the size of the place. And so accountability is an elusive concept. It's something we all want to have. We want to be happy at work. And this book really looks at and sort of tells management and executive teams, approach this from a humanistic perspective and bring these things out in your own employees, because if it germinates organically, you're going to get there a lot more effectively. Like it or not, we all bring our real selves to the job every day, and we're like one square on a quilt, and the quilt is the organization, and we're one square of a quilt that really is the organizational culture. And we're representing that organizational culture and our own commitment, our own accountability, our own responsibility, our own self-responsibility every time we go out of the office or even in the office to do stuff. So while I sell financial services, I'm really selling all of those things. As a Horn client and reader of the book, I think Horn is different, unique, and better than many of the firms that I've seen. And that's because they scratch under the surface of what the problem is. It's a little like, I won't use a colonoscopy analogy, but it's like you go in with, and Sean said it, please help my team to be more effective. And it's why, down a bunch of layers and peeling back the layers of the onion to figure out what the underlying issues are. So, for example, portfolio managers in our business are often great investors, but not so great at communicating what they do. We like them to go to Horn and learn quote-unquote presentation training. But there's a lot of things underlying people's presentation styles that hold them back from being successful. And if you get to the underlying root causes of things, you'll have a much better outcome. So I think Horn has radar for that. And so without any further ado, Art, although you've never been thrown off a plane that I know of, your remarks this morning will likely take us to new heights. So with no further ado, Art Horn.
Morning. Thank you both, Mark and Sean, for those remarks. And thank you for being here, everybody. I realize 7:30, 8 a.m., 8:30 is an early time to make it from where you left this morning. And I had the pleasure of sleeping across the street in a hotel. So I just walked across, not even a coat, so it was a breeze. I would like to speak with you a little bit about the book, of course, but I want to start by first thanking Scaddabush. Scaddabush is actually owned by a large company called Sercorp, and Sercorp is one of our clients who's been with us for 20 years. We've been serving them, and today they're serving us, which is kind of sweet. I want to highlight Dina Kruzik from Horn, who organized most of this event. So way to go, Dina. A round of applause, please. And there's a whole bunch of people in this room I owe a great debt of gratitude to. Hi, Kelly. Not just come here today, but to have followed Horn for the years, our people who have received some of the ideas we've tried to transmit, people who have facilitated our teaching others in organizations around the world. That's kind of neat. This is one of, I think Sean mentioned, one of 2 book launches, so we thought we'd divide the crowd in half because it would be more efficient. But I can see, and maybe Sean, you said this, I missed your remarks. This is obviously the better crowd, right? All right. I want to also thank a couple of other specific people. Lisa Tomasetti is here. She's been with me for 25 years, which in itself is pretty remarkable, just being with me for 25 years. Ask my first wife that question. And Lisa read every word of this book, almost every paragraph as it came out of my printer. And she would slap me around saying, no, you can't say that. So thank you, Lisa, for being that support person. Sitting next to Lisa is Michael Carroll, who's the editor of the book, who read every chapter as it came out and told me how it's not good enough, and who made his own tweaks on my behalf and then told me I have to rewrite this. So thanks to Michael as well. Thanks to the Horn team for making this all come together. Now, I'm going to try to get right into describing the book, and so that you can get a better flavor for what it's all about. You're going to receive a copy later today, of course, when you leave. It's a signed copy. My wrist hurts from that episode. First, the title of the book is a true story. Throw your stuff off the plane. There was a near plane crash, and it was about 35 years ago, and I was in a Cessna aircraft belted into the passenger seat, and I had gone up north to Thunder Bay to fly into Marathon, Ontario, and to pull logs with a long pole, they called it a picaroon, off of Lake Superior with my bare arms. I was in the Thunder Bay airport and asked a man standing next to me, so how do you get to Marathon? He said, I'm flying over there right now. They got a little landing strip, and I can fly you there. So I had 2 boxes of books in a duffel bag, and the boxes of books were deeply important to me. They represented all of my philosophical reading. They're copies of sacred books that I was taking away for the summer in this northern wooded environment to study while I worked in this logging camp. And they represented my philosophical studies at school, and they were really important. And then my duffel bag of socks and underwear. So I got on the airplane, and we began to take off, and the pilot looks at the back of the two boxes of books and says, we should be okay. Now, think about that. Here's a pilot. Don't they have rules and things? But so much for accountability, right? So fine. So we took off. And I remember looking out the side window and thinking, oh, we're on our way to Marathon. There's the forest down there. And then the plane began to shudder. And he was tapping at his gauge. And then he looked back at my books. He says, we're too heavy. Throw your stuff off the plane. And I'm like, what? And the plane actually began to descend as it shuddered. So he said, throw your stuff off the plane. So I undo my seatbelt and realized there's no place to walk in a little Cessna. So I kind of wiggle out the side between the two things and see this little side door and open up the latch, and I watch my 2 boxes of books trembling there while the plane's shaking, and and then I watched them fall. And they're probably still there if you want to, maybe damaged by the snow. So the point of the title of the book is twofold. First of all, it was a true story, but there's also something about throwing your baggage. And sometimes when you want to find increased personal growth, you need to recognize patterns in your thinking and finally get around to saying, nah, and you got to, in some metaphorical way, toss that stuff too. And that's why the main title. The second title is actually me whispering to you saying it's about achieving accountability in business and life for the individual and for a team. In other words, there's 2 target readers for this book. It's almost for some people as a personal reader. It's a self-help tool. I've been practicing coaching now as a coach for 32 years. It's hard to count. And over the years, I've seen patterns. And the book describes some of the patterns that each of us possess that we could explore and then maybe crack open and overcome. So it's a self-help vehicle for those who wish to do it any way you wish. It's also a book written for leaders to inspire leaders to create a greater culture of accountability and to give step by step, as much as possible, information about how to do that and create a culture where people are more accountable. So that's what the book is about. I'd also like you to realize the book took a long time to write, which is kind of weird. It's a book about accountability. And after I wrote for about a year, I stopped. And then people like Lisa, thanks, began to make fun of me, saying, well, you announce to the people you're writing a book about accountability, and you haven't finished the book yet. So there's a hypocrisy built right in, which I own. So I want to confess to you it took a while, but after 8 years, I finally wrapped it up. I'd like to share a story with you that partly explains why I wrote the book. And it's an old story, it's not long. And you know the teenage experience, or just prepubescent experience that people have, we've all probably had it, where you realize, wow, my parents don't know what they're doing. Or you realize, I just saw my mother or my father cry for the first time. I thought they had their heads together. Who's driving the bus on this thing? So all of us have, I think most people have some sort of 12 to 13, 14-year-old experience where they have that kick in the head. I had mine in front of a client. I started my career in consulting 1984, July 10th, We'll talk about that later. And 3 years in, we had our largest client. The first while was with small clients. Average gross sales of, well, the range was maybe $400,000 to $1.2 million. That was our typical client. But this third year in, I and a colleague of mine got this deal for $60,000. And 34 years ago, that's a fair chunk of money for a two-person show, with a huge worldwide brand name, one of the biggest brands in the planet. Because of the nature of the story, I'm not going to tell you who. But it was with a big company, and I had this honor of going into this executive vice president's office to ask him questions so he could explain why he endorsed this project. So I had this meeting in his office, which was literally half the size of this room. And he was an executive vice president. I'd never met a vice president, let alone a senior vice president, let alone an executive vice president. So I was really kind of nervous and was at his boardroom table in his office. Now think about this. His office was so big. In that corner he had his living room area, which was a couch and two big comfy chairs. In this corner he had his boardroom table, which accommodated 14 full guests. I don't know how that works. And then over in that corner, he had his big mahogany desk. So this was a powerful man. He probably made 20 times as much as I was making that year. So I was sitting and he was just telling me, here's why I endorsed this project. And then he said halfway through, oh, you've got a copy of our org chart, don't you? I said, no, sir, I don't have that yet. He said, I'll get one for you. I thought, oh, wow, okay. I did notice that on the spot, he didn't write that down. You know, he didn't say get org chart for Horn. But I thought, executive vice president, you don't get to a job like that if you had to make notes. So somehow, and that night I actually went home thinking, I wonder how he's going to get the org chart to me. Maybe in those days it was a secretary. Maybe his secretary is going to put it in an envelope for me or something. Or maybe some fellow with a chauffeur's cap going to knock on my door and hand it to me in an envelope. Or maybe when I go there next time, they'll just give it to me. And they never did. And that was like watching mommy cry for the first time. Because it's like, hold it now. This fella said he will do something. He didn't do it. How's that work? And I've been fascinated by that for a long time. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. It's fun to have a word on this topic of why people don't do what they say they're going to do. Another reason the book has been written is because I've had a long fascination with willpower. I remember when I was much younger, I was an avid cigarette smoker. And I used to put out a cigarette, you can just hear it, can't you? And tap it into the ashtray and say, you know what? I quit. Yes, I quit. And then 4 hours later, some trigger would arise and I'd be taking another cigarette. And I realized, wow, what's that about? How come I can't just choose to quit? Why can't I start exercising? Why can't I just stop eating so much? Why can't I do all these things I know at some level I ought to do? What's that about? And at the time, I was even more neurotic than I am now. And I researched it, and I found out that willpower was a name given to this struggling with the appetites. Well, actually, it's 2,000 years old, but in Queen Victoria's age, they began to call it willpower, which is when you must bring power to bear to overcome your appetite. You want to be more responsible, it's about finding the power. Nowadays, in 2018, it's clear that it's not about power or the power you have. It's actually about elegance. How gracefully can you manage yourself to maneuver through your appetites? That would make people more responsible or self-responsible. So the book talks about that, of course, and we'll allude to it a little later. But indeed, that's one of the reasons I've written the book. It's because it's a fascinating topic. What is the will? Where's willpower come from? How do you find the grace or elegance to manage your impulses? Finally, the last thing I want to say regarding explanations for writing the book is about my fascination with the topic of blame. Blame is a huge thing. It's about people saying where responsibility should go. That's not really my fault. And about 10 years ago, I began to track how often in a business day the topic of blame would arise in one form or another. And I counted, on a bad day, I counted 20 times roughly where people would make reference to, that actually wasn't me, that was Bob. Or geez, I thought I asked about that. In fact, this morning it's happened 3 times. I'll just tell you one. The door over there says, please come to our Simcoe Street address. If you go to a Simcoe Street door, it says, please go to our Front Street address. So this is, so to those of you who wrestled with that, there's an infinite loop therein, right? And I don't think I saw anyone going back and forth. That would be a bad sign. So then I asked someone about that, and they said, oh no, how could that be? And they began to defend. Not that it mattered, because we just fixed it, we just removed the sign. But the moments spent on explaining how that could go wrong and who was responsible would surprise you. And I suggest you do this today. Think through, as you spend your day, become aware of how often the topic of attribution of responsibility arises. Most arguments, in fact, it was Rollo May who wrote 20 years ago that most human arguments can actually be traced back to a struggle with responsibility. Who's responsible for this? Or you shouldn't have done that. Or my mother didn't breastfeed me after all. That was meant to be a joke. Anyway, she didn't. And there I go. All right. We might want to talk a bit about what is accountability. It's on the 2 slides up here. For most of us, accountability is an obligation to explain ourselves. We have to sort of put ourselves or subject ourselves to the question, what went wrong here, or please explain how you did that. And so accountability often is seen as a kind of a threatening topic. It's also an opportunity, of course. Accountability, when it's installed in an organization, can present wonderful opportunities for people to learn about themselves, to measure their performance, to actually prove themselves as being quite capable. Accountability can be therapeutic for people. It can be an opportunity. You know, when an organization, for example, tells a Salesforce, we're now going to begin tracking the number of outbound blah, blah, blah you do per day. People usually have one of 2 responses. That's terrible, big brother watching, and it's an evil deed, and they're holding me more responsible, or they're going to track me and it's only building a case to release me. And some people, on the other hand, have a reaction of, oh, now I can prove that I'm doing really well. Now I'll have an opportunity to learn. So accountability can be a tremendous opportunity. But when you get a really genuine, authentic culture of accountability, what you really get is an organization of honesty, of full disclosure. When you have a healthy culture of accountability, there's no reason for partial disclosure. There's no reason for people to fear being caught, because there's just full accountability, full honesty. It's a relieving environment, in fact, and maybe some of you have seen it and been working in one. We'll talk more about that later. I would like to tell you when accountability is done right, as it says up here in these slides. I'm only peeking down here, and I'm apologizing for having to look. Basically, it's about high-performance teams. I have been in, by the way, over 35 years. I'm pretty sure 10 years ago we counted how I've been in the bowels of 300 different corporations. So you really amass a lot of diverse culture experiences when you're in the training and consulting field. And from the inside, because people reveal their secrets. But when you see a culture of genuine accountability, you see honesty, you see a lot of high productivity people, you see people who are not assigning blame. You wind up with a higher level of productivity and people who hang around. Employee retention is improved when they work in a full, genuine, healthy culture of accountability. So it's a pretty powerful thing to work on inside an organization. Indeed, when companies decide they want to build a culture of accountability, there's a predictable array of things they do. For example, on the left-hand side, they install systems. So here's what typically happens. Before, a company says, you know what, we have an accountability problem around here. Heads should roll, or we don't really confront people who aren't producing. We let them get away with not coming through on their word, or there's a lot of blame here. We need accountability. So somebody in some room comes up with the idea we should install systems that track people and hold them accountable. Systems that make it clear where they know their jobs, where they know consequences, where compensation is aligned with what we expect people to do. Systems that basically track performance and provide feedback to employees so that leaders can nurture and teach people how to grow and create an environment for continuous improvement. It's a good thing. These systems work. But my experience, having seen hundreds of organizations try to go through the process of becoming more accountable, is that they always seem to stop at the same place. There's a missing ingredient. And the book's about that missing ingredient. It's about how if you want people to be fully accountable, we need to help them become more responsible in and of themselves, so that responsibility drives their performance as opposed to an imposed system of accountabilities. Accountability must come from within. So that begs the question, so, okay, how do you get people to be more self-responsible, to be more flourishing, to unfold in a healthy way? That's the juicy question. And I'm going to try to give you the answer from my experience, at least. So we're talking here about the flourishing self. That is, what any of us could do to improve our ability to come through in our word, to find more willpower, to resist blame. There are things we can do. And consequences. When someone is fully flourishing or unfolding or self-responsible, they tend to be more likely to fulfill their promises. They tend to be more able to overcome their own appetites or resist their own impulses. They tend not to blame others. They just don't go to the topic of blame. They move into action as opposed to deflect or procrastinate. They're action-oriented. They tend to be more curious. They want to learn, and they're open to healthy risk. And basically, this list you're seeing up here correlates with self-esteem. When someone has higher self-esteem, they tend to be more self-responsible. When self-esteem is lower, people tend to shut down, etc. Okay, so then what can be done? And after I make these remarks, we're going to almost stop. First of all, if you recall, the book is designed to talk to a leader and designed to talk to an individual reader. Talk to is a funny phrase, talk with. When it comes to a leader, what can you do to create a culture of accountability? Well, the idea is you want to create a culture where people are flourishing, which means you find positive things to say. You support self-esteem. You make it so that when you're done a conversation with anyone who reports to you, they feel bigger as opposed to smaller. That's actually a visceral experience, by the way. Think about it. If you were a leader and you finished a conversation, do you think the person walking away feels bigger or feels smaller? Because when they feel smaller, when they shrink as a result of a conversation, their self-esteem goes down. When their self-esteem goes down, they're less productive, they're more inclined to blame. The list goes on. When their self-esteem is bigger, just for a little spike time, like just a minute, they're more likely to step up to the plate and face challenges. So the leader plays a big role. Let's spend our time, though, talking about the previous slide, what an individual can do. I hope this works, everybody. I think I just messed up. I did. Isn't that fun? Let's see who we can blame. So what can an individual do? Okay, I would like to tell you a story. And it's about what you can do to increase your own self-esteem and therefore increase the tendency to be a more responsible player by your own definition. By the way, I'm not trying to propose anyone here ought to be optimally responsible. It just doesn't matter. All you have to do is consider being more responsible in the way you want, when you want. There's no rules. But if you happen to say, I probably should do more of this than I do now, then here's one of the tricks. This is the thing about willpower. This is how it's not about power anymore, it's about finesse. So I used to stand in front of audiences like this, sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger, and I would say basically the same thing. And I was experiencing what they call a cognitive dissonance. I would stand in front of a crowd and say, you can choose to be happy. If you're feeling low, you can lift yourself up. You can actually overcome the impulse to feel sad. You can lift yourself up. You can choose to be happy. And then after the presentation, I'd get in my car or go up to the hotel room. If I was in my car, I'd go, nah. Because at some level, I didn't really buy it. I was telling groups of people you can choose to overcome your own impulses. And in my heart, I thought, well, not so easy. It's not easy to overcome appetites. So then I was going through this for a long time. I remember coming home from work one day, and I walked into my house, and my wife saw me, and she said, oh, you're looking, what's wrong? What's on your mind? I said, well, I'm feeling kind of low. And she said, oh, Mr. Enlightenment. Come on, pick yourself up. That was my first wife, actually. Right? We all know what happened there. But she, in a sense, she was at a pinch point. I was saying one thing and yet unable to pull it off myself. So anyway, at that time, my office was in the Shepherd Center, and I took a subway up and downtown all the time. And I was having lunch one day with a buddy of mine who's a medical doctor in Mount Sinai Hospital, just around the corner. And I was saying to him, Arnie, I have a kind of a cognitive dissonance thing going on, because I'm saying to groups one thing, and yet I can't do it myself. So he gave me a prescription. But it wasn't medical, it wasn't a molecule, it was advice. He said, well, when you go back up to your office, you'll take the subway, right? I said, yeah. He said, you can take the stairs or the escalator when you get to the Shepherd stop. What are you going to take? And he knew I was an escalator kind of guy. So he said, take the stairs. Why? Because you don't want to. Why would I do that? It's contradictory. He said, that's the point. When you practice doing little things you don't want to do, when you override that little impulse, you wind up getting stronger. By the time you get to the top of the stairs, you look back and say, I did that. When you do little things you don't want, so his prescription was, by the way, 3 times a day for about 2 weeks, do a little thing you don't want to do. You want to get home quickly, take the long way. You want to eat a piece of apple pie, wait 15 minutes. You want to take the escalator, take the stairs. By the time you do that, by the end of the day, you wind up discovering, holy mackerel, there's 2 things in here. There's me and there's my appetite. And now I can become the chooser. Up till now in my life, I've just been the robot. So by that empowerment, that's what flourishing looks like, right? When you can begin to choose and make choices. And the book is about how do you find the way to make those choices? How do you gracefully navigate that path? That's pretty neat, I think. So anyway, since then I've been exercising 5.5 days a week for the last 25 years. And I try my best to overcome little appetites, and I wind up being an agent of choice. Odd but true. Okay, the second thing, explore unwanted habits. Mental habits, and throw them off the plane. Probably the big middle part of this book is about how you can actually recognize that the things you wish you were doing that you're not doing are real, and the reason you don't do them, all of us, is your brain is reminded of them and just skips past. It's like, that thing you're procrastinating on, that each of us knows we should be doing more of that. Every time the opportunity to do it arises, your brain, not wanting to do it, just skips past it. Say, I'll do that later. Or if you know you should be delegating more than you do, and the thing that comes up that you should be delegating and you don't delegate it, what's happening is all the reasons underneath that you don't delegate, they just help you skip past the decision to delegate and continue doing it the old way. It's like we have these little robotic reactions, and the trick here is to crack it open and just open that up and ask yourself, why am I procrastinating? Or why don't I delegate? Or why don't I do what I wish I could do? Or really actually personally want to do? As soon as you open it up, you find out the reason. One of my favorite lines of Leonard Cohen is, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. There's a crack in, I forget the song, I think it's Anthem. There's a crack, I can't sing it for you, not in his voice. There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. Well, there's a crack in your thinking when it comes to the thing you want to do differently, and all you have to do is crack it open a bit more, shine a light in, and talk about it. If you tell people the reasons you don't do what you want to do, you're more likely to begin doing the good thing. If you write it out to yourself, you're more likely to do a good thing. If you actually explore, why do I have the impulse to do that thing I wish I wasn't doing, just learning more about it, you wind up more likely to do the right thing. There's you. And there's one last thing I want to say about this topic of what you can do. I've been doing this job of mine for 35 years, and frankly, I'm all about helping an individual to flourish. And I know that if you do things you don't want to do, you're more likely to flourish. I know that if you talk to people about the things you wish you were doing differently, you're more likely to flourish. I also know that if you visualize what you're trying to accomplish, as long as people have been saying that, you're more likely to accomplish it. Just because your brain, I don't know if you've ever heard of psychocybernetic loop, your brain, when you have a goal and a well-visualized goal, tends to remember, oh yeah, that's where I'm heading. Oh yeah, that's where I'm heading. And if you don't have a vision for where you want to go, you just tend not to get there because your appetites take you off track. So let me tell you the answer to the question, how did I start my business? It happens to be the most frequent question I'm asked. How did I start the business? And it links right to this topic of it helps to have a goal. So 35, in fact, on July 10th, 1984, at 2:12 in the afternoon, I had been reading a book, in this particular case, and I'd read this idea before by Thoreau that said, and I won't quote it because I'm not sure I can, but if you visualize what you want to do, create a vision of it in your mind's eye, and then open your eyes and then declare, that's who I am now, you're more likely to be that. So at that time, I read that paragraph and said, you know what, it's time for me to actually do this. I'm going to try this stupid little experiment, and I'm going to visualize me being a consultant. This is 35 years ago, 34 years ago, right? And I still have the vision in my mind. It's this. This is the vision I created for myself. It's me as a consultant in the Shepherd Center where I lived, carrying 2 file folders under my arm, with this pose, because I was rushing to get a telephone, because I was a busy consultant. This was my vision. It still is. So I sat there for 20 minutes visualizing that image. Just this, 20 minutes. And of course, during that 20-minute period, my attention would wander off, and I'd have to bring it back. But basically, that was the vision. I even added some color. What was I wearing, and what was that phone ringing sounding like, etc. So I embedded that vision in my consciousness. And then after that 20 minutes, I opened my eyes and said, this is it. I am now a consultant. That's it. I have changed my being. And by the way, it worked, right? Because I'm here. So that's it. So then I'm sitting there, and I didn't tell you this, I was in my bathrobe during this whole thing, otherwise naked. And after this experience, I enjoyed it. I had a smoke. And I said, well, I'm a consultant now. The phone's not ringing. How come the phone's not ringing? I guess I have to, right, yeah, that's the other side of this. You actually have to do the thing. So, and this is true, I literally got up, put the cigarette out, and I remember the moment. I got up and I went to my little spare office where that phone had been ringing, and I pulled out an old Yellow Pages book, and it was hard copy in those days. And I opened up to some target clients, and I made a bunch of phone calls, and within an hour, I got an appointment to my first client. Actually, I got an appointment to go get a client, didn't get that client. But I set an appointment, and that was the beginning. And I'm telling you, it was partly fueled or informed by this success by having a vision. It made a difference. Okay, so now I'm going to stop speaking after I sort of, Horn is a training company no matter how you cut it, so I can't just give a presentation and then say, okay, goodbye, I need to assign homework. So hopefully you're going to remain here for a while and do some networking. If you need something to talk about, here's a little challenging exercise for you. There's 8 things listed on the screen, and they're all in the book except for one. They're all actually in the book, except for one. And your job is to figure out which one of these 8 sentences or 8 ideas is not actually in the book. And based on the values I've presented to you this morning, you could deduce the answer to these things. And so I encourage you to do that. You don't have to. There's no assignment. But if you want to, you could explore that. I'll come back up here in about 10 minutes, and we'll do a Q&A. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take a stab, and we'll certainly do a show of hands on the answer of these, on the one answer that actually is not in the book. So in terms of my formal presentation, I'm hereby done. Thank you very much for coming here and for your attention. Thank you. Number 4 is 8 Steps in Apology is actually in the book. We could do this 8 times. Adrienne? Glucose is in the book. Yeah, is in the book. Andrea? Number 6. The funeral director stayed in the doorway is in the book. Tim? Hillary is not in the book. Hillary said she was accountable for, but although she didn't say that, and I thought it was remarkable, but it's not in the book. Anyway, everybody, thanks for coming, and are there any questions you want to raise? Then I'm going to say I appreciate you being here. Bye. Thank you.